No one was offering us anything. But as we continue to pray, we continue to feel peace. I sent a text to a friend of mine who lives in Southern California, who pastors a church there, who's really good friends of ours. And I said, I just asking for your prayers. Here's where we're at. There's opportunity in Sacramento, but we're feeling peace in Southern California. He said, I'll be praying. About 2 hours later, he calls back, or he sends me a message back, and they say, hey, the district superintendent in this area wants your information. I said, oh, that's awesome. Did you give it to him? Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, we did. About a half hour later, he calls me and he says, hey, the district superintendent's going to be calling you in a little bit. 10 minutes later, he called. And he said, we have an opportunity. We heard about you. Your name's been given to us. We have an opportunity to help revitalize the churches in Southern California. It's in San Bernardino. Are you interested? And as I'm talking to him on the phone, I'm running through my basement like, but I'm on the phone like, I'll have to pray about it. I get off the phone and I run upstairs and no one's home. So I can't tell anybody. So I try to call my wife. She doesn't answer. She does that a lot. And then my youngest daughter, walked in the house, and I just say, hey, guess what? And she doesn't really care. She was excited. I was excited, but she's not wrapping her head around this. But she was the first person I told. But we were super excited, and we just kind of felt that this was God. And so we started looking into it, and God just continued to make it clear. And so on April 1st, I start our new venture in San Bernardino. Amen. So I was out in California this past week to kind of talk about that and meet with some of the other pastors that are planting churches. I'm not planting the church. I'm helping to revitalize a church. I'm going to be training its leaders and raising up the next pastor that will step into that role. That's my role. The pastor who's going out has been there for over 30 years. And when I met with the people, and they said, well, how long do you plan on being here? And I said, I'm not 30 years. Yeah. And if you want me to be, you probably should pick somebody else. But they're excited. They're nervous, as you can imagine. We all are, but we see God's hand. As I was at this conference or this training, one of the things that was being talked about was you need to understand your values, your core values. You need to understand your vision, and you need to understand who it is you're targeting. And maybe part of my irritation during that was because I've already thought about those things. And we spent 3 days talking about that. And I'm rolling my eyes thinking, why does this take me so long? And sometimes I honestly think we as Christians, we overcomplicate things. That's right. And we preach too long. That's right. We talk too much. Yeah. Thank you. And we have a tendency to move God out of the way when we do that. And I think if we are quiet more often, and we listen more carefully, and we abide, then I think we could be engaged in the supernatural far more often than we are. Yeah. Amen. And so when they gave us time to write out our core values, and I'm like, I was done within like 30 seconds. My core value, one of my top core values is this, that everybody matters. Yeah. Amen. I thought it was pretty simple. And I honestly thought that everybody would have that on their thing. But I was the only one who did. And I'm not saying that to brag, but I'm just saying I think sometimes when we get caught up in this, we fail to realize what God cares about. And that God cares about every single one of us so deeply and so incredibly. You matter to Him. Thank you, Lord. And sometimes, too often, and I know I've been guilty of this because my whole ministry life has been based on performing for God. I've been trying to prove to God that I'm worthy to be loved. That I'm worthy to stand in a pulpit or stand in front of people. And if I do that well, then God would say, good boy. But you know, that doesn't matter to God. Do you know God delights in you just because of who you are?
Amen. Amen.
I had a grandson born almost 2 weeks ago.
Amen. Amen.
2 Sundays ago, I didn't even know I was going to have a grandson.
Right.
There's a story with all this. You can talk to me later about it. And I actually found out 2 Sundays ago that I was going to have a grandson. And my daughter didn't even know she was pregnant.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah. And I was hit with that news, and you know, my knees buckled a little bit. I was like, oh, you know. And I knew to pray. I didn't know if my grandson was alive or healthy, because my daughter had gone 9 months without knowing she was pregnant. So we prayed. And when he was born on March 14th, he didn't have to do anything to win my heart.
Amen.
The only thing he did was breathe. And I fell in love.
Mm-hmm.
And as a grandfather, I know how to do that. Don't you think God knows how to do that with us?
Yeah.
We don't have to perform for him.
Mm-mm.
But I do believe God has imparted and placed inside each and every one of us a way to live. And so, as I said, everybody matters. That was my first one. My second core value was we need to have radical encounters with God. Not experiences, but encounters. Because when you have a radical encounter with God, one, you begin to realize your dependency upon the Lordship of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Yeah.
Peter had a radical encounter with Jesus the first time he met him. They were on a boat, and Jesus says, go out and fish again. And everything in the natural mind says, that's stupid. But he goes out, and he does it anyway, and he has the biggest catch of his life. And Peter looks at Jesus and says, get away from me. I am an unclean man. Because he realizes the lordship of Jesus. That's an encounter. That's a radical encounter. And we need those radical encounters with Christ. We also need, and this is my third one, we need to be radically generous. And what does that look like? That means we stop looking at people through our eyes and we start looking at them through God's eyes.
That's it.
See, we always have these pre-qualifiers of how we're going to give to people or how we're going to give to causes. We see people who hold up signs and maybe we ignore them. You know, one of the most awkward things is like when you're pulling out of a mall or something, somebody's like standing right at the corner, right at the intersection, and the light turns red and they're holding a sign and you can read it, but you act like you don't. You know what I mean?
No.
You don't even cut your eyes over. You just roll up the window. And that person's standing right there. But we have this, we pre-qualify them. But what if we took the time to just listen and ask God, what are you saying right now? Not about that person, but about me. And how do you want me to respond? I think the outcome would be totally different. We need to be radically generous. Sometimes being radically generous means, you know what, I just came across $7,000, I don't know what to do with it. And then we hear about a need to buy an apartment. It's like, well, maybe that's what God wants me to do with that.
Amen.
Which led me into, those three core values led us into the vision that I have. And this is what I really want to share with you. How many of you guys have ever heard of Babe Ruth?
Yep.
Show of hands. Who's heard of Babe Ruth? Okay. You know, it's kind of interesting. There's certain people who transcend culture. I never saw Babe Ruth swing a baseball bat during his playing time. But I know who Babe Ruth is. I probably knew about Babe Ruth. I probably knew his name before I knew my dad's name. I probably saw him more often. Anyway. Anyway. But it's quite interesting. My kids know who Babe Ruth is. Because there's something about him that transcended, and he changed the sport. And when you can name somebody like that, it starts to give you vision, because as soon as I say Babe Ruth, there's a thought or vision that comes to your mind, right?
Yep.
And whatever that is, it doesn't really matter. That's what vision is all about. You say something, so something pops in your mind and says, oh, how can I connect this to what you're saying and to where you're going in the direction that God is leading you? So me saying Babe Ruth, it starts to stir something up inside of you and start to create a vision inside of you. But here's what it is. I heard this quote. I didn't hear it. I read this quote about him that he gave, actually. He said, Babe Ruth, by the way, for the longest time, had the record for the home runs for a career. 714. He also had the record for the most home runs in a season. He held that for a long time, too. He pitched. He was considered one of the greatest baseball players who ever played the game. And so he was being asked at the end of his career, he was being asked about his career, and here's one of the quotes that he said. He said, how to hit home runs. I swing as hard as I can, and I try to swing right through the ball. The harder the grip, the harder you grip the ball, the bat, the more you can swing it through the ball. And the farther the ball will go. Then he says, I swing big with everything I got. I hit big or I miss big. I like to live as big as I can.
Hallelujah.
I just want to leave two words with you this morning. Live big. Live big. That's our vision for this next season in life, is to live big.
Come on.
So what does that mean? And, you know, everybody wants an explanation. And I was the first one to write down our vision. And it was a simple, live big. Placed it on the wall. Everybody else had theirs displayed everywhere else. And they said, okay, Kevin, you go first. And I said, it's real simple. We make things way too complicated. Live big. And so then the professionals in the room wanted to analyze what I meant. Like, it's really simple. Most of us live beneath what God's created us for. And we need to step up to what he's calling us to. Live big. Well, how do you define that, Kevin? I said, in every situation that you have breath and that your eyes are open, live as big as you can.
Amen.
You see, we get so bogged down with making mistakes that we want to do it right. And so we want to have everything in order and a system and a method on how to do this. But Babe Ruth said, sometimes I hit big, sometimes I miss big, but in either case, I'm living big.
Amen. Amen.
That's where we have to be. So what if we screw it up? Guess what? God has accounted for every screw up we'll ever make.
Hallelujah.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Oh, glory.
How do I know that?
They do.
Well, there was a man named Moses that you're familiar with that God had encountered. Moses had a radical encounter with God. You remember that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. He saw a burning bush. You ever think you ever think about this? Did he ever forget that he ran into a burning bush to talk to him?
No.
This is what I mean by encounter. Experiences come and go. Most of those we kind of forget about, or somebody has to remind us of. But an encounter we will never ever forget, because it transforms everything about us.
Yeah.
not only does it transform, but it changes the direction in the course of our life.
That's good.
Moses was just tending sheep. It said he was doing that for 40 years. I'm sure after 40 years he thought, I'm never getting out of this. But in year 40, he encounters God, and God says, I got a plan for you. Guess what, Moses? My plan for you has never changed. This was always the plan. Yeah, there was a delay in this, but don't think about it because you screwed up. Because that's what we do. Moses killed somebody and thought, my life's over. But this is what God told him. He said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to free the Israelites. And Moses was like, huh? Well, what if they don't believe me? I just think that's funny. Because these are excuses I use. Well, first of all, you're talking to a burning bush. The first time you tell somebody you talk to a burning bush, they're not going to believe you. What was Moses out in the wilderness smoking? And so he's asking for all this information. He's trying to package this thing. He said, what if they don't believe me, God? And God said, okay, here's the thing. And God doesn't make it easy. He said, okay, do this. Throw down your staff. He says, what's in your hand? He says, a stick. He said, well, throw it down. He throws it down and it becomes a snake. And Moses runs from it, smart man.
Right.
But God says, pick it up. He also does something peculiar in that moment. He says, pick it up by the tail. Now, I've never picked up a snake in my life. Don't plan on it.
Smart man.
Right. Now, but I know if I'm ever going to pick up a snake, it's going to be by its head.
Yeah.
You know why? You pick it up by its tail, it's going to whip back, and it's going to cause some serious damage. Well, God tells Moses, pick it up by the tail. You know what Moses has to do in that moment? He has to take God at his word.
Yeah.
He has to trust what God is saying. Because it goes against their natural instinct to pick up a snake by its tail. And I'm sure being in the wilderness, tending sheep for 40 years, he probably ran across his fair share of snakes. Well, God says, pick it up by the tail. He says, wow, God, I'm going to have to trust exactly what you're saying. He picks it up by his tail and turns back into a stick. And he said, God says, they don't believe that sign, they'll believe the second one. He said, now take your hand, put it inside your cloak. He puts it inside his cloak, he takes it out, and it's leprous as snow. That's what the Bible says. When Moses looks at his hand, he says, I'm done. Leprosy is incurable. He's looking at hopelessness. He's looking at no future. He's looking at a death sentence. Well, God says, put it back in your cloak. Puts it back in, it comes out, and it's restored. How many of you know that the story that God is writing is a story of redemption? When that hand becomes new, the statement that God is making is, behold, I make all things new.
Yeah.
But there's something deeper for Moses. Because Moses is burdened by the reality, I screwed up 40 years ago when I killed an Egyptian. And whatever hope I had for Israel, it's gone. When he takes that hand out of his cloak and it's restored, God is saying, you know what, Moses, I accounted for that mistake. And I renewed it. And I made it new and I restored it. Not only it, but I restored you. You have credibility in Egypt because you have me with you. Now go. We are designed for glory.
Yes.
We've been designed for God's glory. We've been designed for something great. We've been designed to live bigger. You and I that are sitting in this room who know and call upon the name of Jesus Christ, we are designed to transform every city we will ever occupy.
Amen.
Do you understand that?
That's the truth.
Bart and Kim are in this city because God called them to Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm sure they had to look that up on a map. But they knew they're here to transform this city.
That's right.
Everywhere we go, we're to leave an impact. Everywhere we go, we're supposed to have purpose and meaning in people's lives. Everybody matters. We are to live big. And if we screw it up big, we screw it up big. It's accounted for because God is writing a redeeming story.
Amen.
In John 11, there's a story of Lazarus. I'm glad you brought this up. He said, now a man named Lazarus, he was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. You guys know the story. I won't even go through all the detail. Read it on your own because I just want to kind of wrap this up. Lazarus was sick. Jesus is trying to explain this to his apostles. He said, hey, Lazarus is sick. And they're like, okay, if he's sick, he'll get better. No, he's sleeping. He's like, oh, well, he's asleep, he'll wake up. No, he's dead. Oh. And we're going back there to raise him up. Thomas had a little brother in him. Because you're like, no, I ain't going back there. They're going to kill us. And finally he concedes, and at the end, in verse 16, he says, then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, and you know this was kind of sarcastic, let us all also go that we may die with him. Guess we all dying today, Jesus. That's the way it's going down. You can't, there's no way I can read this and think that Thomas was laying, oh yeah, let's all do this. No, he's like, you know what? Jesus is setting us up again. You ever feel like God is setting you up? I was doing some research on San Bernardino. By the way, San Bernardino is, of its size, is the second poorest city in the United States. Behind Detroit. Whenever you say Detroit, and whatever comes after it, it's like, oh man. In 2015, the city filed for bankruptcy. The disparity between those who are wealthy and those who are poor is enormous. There's gangs there, the crime rate is high, and I'm like, why am I going to San Bernardino? I was telling people in Southern California that God is calling us to Southern California, and they're like, where are you going? San Bernardino. And there are people in Southern California are like, why are you going to San Bernardino? Nothing good comes from there. Well, God has called us there. Because I believe God is setting us up to transform a city. Amen. He wants us to live big there so that the people there know that they matter and they can have hope.
Yeah.
I'm not like Thomas. Where Thomas like, well, okay, we're just going to move to San Bernardino. We're all going to die. And it says on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. How many wish Jesus would hurry up? How many of you ever think, man, you're taking way too long? And our response to him is like Mary and Martha. Lord, have you been here? And it's funny when you read this account, when Mary and Martha find out that Jesus shows up, Martha goes out to him. If you recall the story where Jesus was actually at their house, Martha was in the kitchen and Mary was at Jesus' feet. It's kind of reversal this time. Jesus shows up and Martha runs out and Mary says, I'm staying home. He should have been here. It's almost like she has an attitude. Mary stays back at the house, but Martha comes out and says, Lord, I'm glad you're here, but if you'd have been here, my brother would still be alive. And he says, don't you know who I am? First of all, I am. Secondly, I'm the resurrection and the life. Mary finally comes out and she says the same thing. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would be alive. He said, you have no idea what you're about to see today. You're about to see something extraordinary. You're about to see something that's going to blow your mind because of who I am. I knew what I was doing when I delayed. I knew what I was doing when I was waiting. I was writing a story for you that you will never ever forget. I was setting things up for not only Lazarus' resurrection, but for my own. Because I'm getting this world ready for something big. Jesus lived big because he knew who he was. He lived big because everyone he encountered mattered to him. He lived big because he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That's the way he was able to do that.
Amen.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. Amen.
He died big as well. How many of us can say, will be able to say at our death, it's done? Jesus was able to say it is finished because he realized he accomplished everything his life was set up for. See, living big also means going to the grave empty. Don't take anything with you. Don't allow the people that will grieve over you after you go say, man, they could have been this. But let us be able to rejoice and say, man, this individual, they lived it all out. They left everything in life. And they lived what God created them for. Live big. When Jesus saw in verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And then Jesus wept. That's just a beautiful, beautiful verse. Jesus wept. It's comforting to know that Jesus cries over us, that he weeps for us. And I think he weeps for us because it's generated by the reality that we don't believe him. And because we don't believe him, we live short of what we are created for. See, if we fully believed who Jesus was and who Jesus is, we would have no trouble living big. But the fact that we question who he is, the fact that we doubt who he is, leaves us to find out and search out counterfeits in our lives to chase after that don't do anything for us.
Amen.
But continues to perpetuate the cycle of living beneath what we were really destined for. But when we begin to understand who Jesus really is, when we believe him and take him at his word, we will live big. See, God is looking for people he can entrust his mission with. He's looking for people that will worship him in spirit and truth. Not in a system, not in a method, but he's looking for people to say, you know, God, have it all. I'm done. Here I am. I release it all over to you. Do whatever pleases you. It does not matter because I'm going to watch you deliver me. I'm going to watch you redeem me. I'm going to watch you provide for me. Here I am. Then the Jews said, see how he loved them. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Why was that even a question? You ever have Jesus do something, God do something for you miraculous that you thought, how did that happen? And then in the next breath, you doubting? Well, if he can't open the eyes of the blind, yes, he can raise the dead. It shouldn't even be a question. But we're all guilty of that. Jesus, in verse 38, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But the Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. It's amazing to me how rational we can be with Jesus. And we're always responding to him like he doesn't make sense. Jesus says, roll away the stone. And Martha's like, well, wait a minute. He's been in there for 4 days. He stinks. As if Jesus didn't know. And he was like, maybe you haven't thought about this, Jesus. I know you've been busy. I've been fishing all night, and I've been doing this all my life. And I know you want me to go back out during the day to fish again. Well, we don't do that. Roll away the stone. Then Jesus said, because he had said this repeatedly, did I not tell you that if you believe, you'll see the glory of God? I think we need to hear that again. If you believe, you'll see the glory of God.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you.
If we as a people believe, we will see the glory of God. It's not a wish. It's not an if. It will happen. And we've already seen it. We've tasted it. We touched it. But I want to live in it.
Yeah.
So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. That Dove's Eye song keeps coming back, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of those, the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me.
Hallelujah.
When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Wouldn't you have loved to have been there?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you have been there with bated breath, moving to the edge of your seat, everybody holding their collective breath, thinking, what's going to happen now? The Bible doesn't indicate that it was a delay. But what if it was? What if it took like 30 minutes for Lazarus to come out? There are probably people in that crowd who probably like, he ain't coming. And they started walking away. And then there's those who probably would have stuck around just to hear other people make fun of Jesus. And there have probably been a few that said, I'm believing. And probably silently praying, come on, Lazarus. And I'm sure Mary and Martha were at the front of that. Come on. Come on. But the Bible doesn't indicate that there was a delay. It says this. It says, when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And then it says in verse 44, the dead man came out. He came out. He came out, and his hands and his feet were wrapped in strips of linen, and a cloth was around his face. Now, I get a little excited when I see miracles. I would have been jumping around, oh, he's alive! I would have run to the next village and told everybody. But see, there's a problem with that. Because there's something else, a fine detail that gets overlooked if you just run off. Jesus said, take off the grave clothes.
That's it.
Come on. Are you with me? In order for us to move forward, to be able to live big, in order for us to continue on our journey, we have to take off our past. We have to let go of what it is that we've been holding on to that is keeping us bound, that is preventing us from moving forward in the destiny that God has called us to. We have to take off those dead man clothes. We have to strip ourselves of our past and know that it's already been redeemed and paid for. You have no right any longer to dwell on your past. You know why? Because your past has already been paid for.
Amen.
It's been bought. It's been settled. The debt has been canceled. You have no longer a right to hold on to the things that have kept you bound. And I don't care what it is. Let it go so that you can move forward. You ever think Lazarus ever forgot that he was dead? I don't think he needed a reminder. I don't think he still needed his strips of linen. So when folks came over, he said, "Hey, you see this? I was bound by these." He doesn't need that. And if whether you believe him or not doesn't really matter. Because I'm sure his testimony included this moment. Don't you think? Don't you think that anytime Lazarus encountered and came across somebody who was intersected in somebody else's life, he said, "You won't believe what happened to me." You know, I was stinking. Old Spice wasn't doing nothing for me. I was in the grave for 4 days. And Jesus called me out. And I've heard this said before that Jesus had to be specific about calling out Lazarus, because when you're in a graveyard and Jesus says, "Dead man come out," everybody getting up. Right. But I'm sure the testimony of Lazarus is, you know, I was bound by death and Jesus set me free. Well, where's the mummy clothes, Lazarus? I don't need those anymore. I'm not bound by those things any longer. I am set free to move forward in my future. I'm set free to take the next step on my journey into my destiny. I no longer have to hold on to those things. See, I don't care what you've been through. I don't care what you've done. I don't even care what people said about you. None of those things matter. Those things are dead, they're gone, and they need to be laid in the grave, because you are now alive and you are walking forward. You are moving forward. Your destiny is to live big.
Amen. Amen.
How awesome is that? So as we move forward in this journey, I'm asking for your prayers. By the way, we don't even have a place to live yet. I start next Sunday. Normally, I would be out of my mind stressed about that. Probably 3 weeks ago, I would have been. But God has been doing something. And he's letting me know that he can be trusted. And that wasn't a secret. It was just something he was waiting for me to catch up to. And it happened in the most ridiculous way. Two Sundays ago, like I said, I found out that my daughter was pregnant. My oldest daughter, Kennedy, she was in Salt Lake City, and she just thought she was depressed and eating bad, and she gained a little bit of weight. But if you looked at her, you couldn't tell. No one could. And then my wife, while she was in Salt Lake City, texted her and said, "Take a pregnancy test," and she did. And it came back positive. I came back from preaching at church in Wahoo. I get home, and my wife explains to me that I'm going to have another grandchild. And my thought was, how's that even possible? And she said, "And by the way, not only are you going to have a grandchild, she's due this month." I had a lot of questions. And I had a lot of doubt. Because my daughter, during these past 9 months, she's flown out of the country. She's been all over the place. She wasn't preparing to treat herself like she was pregnant. And I thought, there's no way that this baby's healthy. I don't even know if this baby's alive. Well, 2 Mondays ago, she came home. I picked her up from the airport, and I drove her home, and we get home, and as soon as we walk in the door, my wife grabs my daughter and begins to speak a parental blessing over my daughter. And then I spoke one. And then I laid my hands on my daughter's stomach, and I began to pray, and I said, "Grandson." I had no idea it was a son. I said, "Grandson, just as Jesus calls Lazarus from the grave, I'm calling you forth now. And I speak life over you in the name of Jesus. And I tell you to come forth. And we love you We accept you. You belong here. The next morning, she woke up and she looked like she swallowed a basketball. And we took her to took her to the pregnancy center, and they're amazing over there. They're doing an ultrasound as she's laying on the table. My wife and I look at each other, and we notice that my daughter's stomach is getting bigger as she's laying on the table. We don't know if this baby has 4 limbs. We don't know if it has 10 fingers, 10 toes. We don't know anything. We know it has a heartbeat. So we're excited. That was Monday. On Wednesday afternoon, she gave birth to Aiden Malachi.
Amen.
And in that whole moment, that whole time, God spoke to me. And he said, do not doubt me. My hand has been on this the entire time. See, here's what happened. My youngest son and Kennedy were out in California with me a few weeks ago. Tate was supposed to be in school, but because some financial aid stuff happened at the school, he couldn't go to school anymore, so he went to California with us. While they were in California, they were in San Diego with my oldest son who was out there doing work. They went staying at his hotel for the night, or for a few days. Tate looks at Kennedy and says, my sister getting fat. Just like a younger brother would do, not thinking anything. He gets home, and we get home, and 2 Saturdays ago, we're at home, and Caden, Tate, and my wife are staying in the kitchen talking with one another, and my son is telling my youngest daughter and my wife how fat Kennedy's getting, and that she needs to start working out. I walk in the room, and they're laughing about this, or Tate's laughing about this, and Beth jokingly says, Tate thinks your daughter's pregnant. And she laughs about it. And I said, that's weird. She said, why? I said, because 3 weeks ago I had the same thought. She said, really, why? I said, I don't know. But I was never going to say anything. So my wife got on the phone with my daughter, and she said, you need to go take a pregnancy test. And I'm condensing this story. So she does. She comes out. She finds out that she is pregnant. So she's in Salt Lake City. Her due date was March 27th. My wife gets on a plane. She comes back to Lincoln on that Monday. My son goes out on Sunday night to take her place because she's house sitting and dog sitting for a family who won't get back into the United States until March 29th. And God says, my hand has been here. Why do you think I wouldn't let your son's financial aid go through? I wouldn't let his financial aid go through so he could be in California with his sister, so he could look at his sister's stomach and criticize her and say she's getting fat. Because that would trigger something in you and remind you what I've been saying to you, but you've been trying to ignore. That triggered something in your wife to start getting on the phone and start talking to your daughter. My hand has been on this. Had that never happened, your daughter would have been in Salt Lake City all by herself, having a baby, thinking she was dying, not knowing what was going on. That's why I did what I did. My hand is on this. I am a redeeming God. I am the God that calls people out of the grave into life. That's who I am. We are destined for greatness. Live big. God bless you.
Amen. Amen.
I'll take a second offering. Wow. I just want to, Lord, you think you could just kind of play softly and tenderly? Wow. Kevin doesn't know this, but we've been on the theme for, this will be the 3rd week in a row, God's delays don't mean denials. I think God may be saying something.
Yeah.
I just want us to be listening. And I just want to take a moment, I don't want to drag this out, but you've already got the seed in your heart. So I just want to, in fact, Lord, I declare over this word that was sown in our heart today that the enemy will have no opportunity to come and steal it. But I make a decree that it will take root, even in my own heart, God. I am receiving this. I will live big in God. Thank you. But over every heart in this room, I decree that the word sown in it today will take root, and that it will spring up, and it'll bring forth much fruit to the glory of God. Because you said this is how my Father's glorified, when we bring forth much fruit. I thank you for it. Thank you, God. If you're here and just maybe you've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and you just want somebody to agree with you in prayer, we're going to invite you to come forward. Have my wife come forward. Anybody else? Kevin, come forward. Anybody else who just, if you need prayer, it's like, God, it's looking hopeless in my life. If that's you, come forward. And we just want to, listen, God's already done the work. It's already paid for. But we just want to agree with heaven on your behalf. Maybe you've been waiting on a promise to come forth. You want us to agree with that? Maybe. I feel like there's a couple of people here. You can't see a future. You don't even, it's like your dream's been stolen. I feel like there's at least two people here that applies to. It's like, I don't even know where to start. I don't even have a dream. We want to agree with you. And we want to pray for you. Thank you. Thank you. Like, where do I start, God? Don't even know where to start. I want my dream back. Lord, I thank you that you're here today to give a dream. A fresh dream, a fresh vision. Like God wants to put a new baseball bat in your hands. Thank you.